And I actually have to thank Tony Jones, who's one of the emergent leaders, for helping me, because I had a meeting with Tony. We were going to talk about doing another debate. I debated Doug Padgett back in 2006, and we had a meeting to see if maybe we could arrange another debate, but Tony wasn't interested in that. But Tony says, you just ask me and I'll tell you. Whatever you want to know about Emergent, you ask me and I'll tell you. So I asked him about Jürgen Moltmann, and he said, well, I'm a student of one of his disciples.
Tony Jones just finished his doctorate under Miroslav Volf from Princeton. But Miroslav Volf is his mentor, and Volf's mentor is a Nazi POW turned theologian named Jürgen Moltmann.
Jürgen Moltmann, a German Reformed theologian, was born in 1926 in Hamburg. He was drafted into German military service in 1944. He recalls reading the works of Nietzsche during the miseries of war. In 1945, he surrendered to the British and was held as a prisoner of war for the next 3 years.
It turns out last fall I went to Chicago at my own expense in order to listen to a conference with 250 emergent leaders, and the keynote speaker was Jürgen Moltmann. The kind of Christian he became was really shaped by his theological education in Germany. And so he went to the German theological schools, which were extremely liberal.
After being released to his hometown at age 22, Moltmann began his work in theology, attempting to reach the survivors of his generation. The eschatological orientation of Marxist philosopher Ernest Bloch was the inspiration for his first major work, Theology of Hope.
He's known for his eschatology of hope, which is really a kind of a ponderous and very difficult thing to get your head around.
And so what he decided to do was to create a theology where everything's going to get better. There's no future judgment. History is heading toward paradise, not toward destruction. And everybody's going to be reconciled to God. So he's a universalist, which he confirmed when I heard him speaking. He's a universalist.
God may be a universalist because he had created them and would certainly like to see them again. Universalism is not only to speak about all human beings. It's about to speak about the universe, the stars and the moon and the sun and the whole cosmos. And this is always misunderstood by these fundamentalists who want to have a dual end. The one go to heaven, the other go to hell, and the earth will be burned in fire. This is anti-creation.
Moltmann also developed an interest in Luther and Hegel, who is referenced more times than any other author in his book, Theology of Hope.
Moltmann, as I looked through the index of his book, his number one source is a guy by the name of Hegel, who was a German philosopher from real early in the 19th century, right around the turn of that century. And Hegel had a philosophy that you could call spiritual evolution. And Hegel was teaching spiritual evolution long before biological evolution was ever proposed. Okay? So the idea is that God is infused into everything, and God is emerging from within everything, and therefore everything's going to get better because God is still creating the world.
The total unity of community is ultimately achieved eschatologically. And that eschatological community unity is the embracing of one global community.
There is nothing but hope and nothing but a bright, beautiful future.
Let me get to the heart of the matter. The last chapter of my book is about Ken Wilber, who's a pantheistic Buddhist philosopher, who even Brian McLaren claims it was his inspiration. So I'm not making this up.
Ken Wilber is an American author and philosopher who has written about adult development, developmental psychology, philosophy, and ecology. He has been greatly impacted by and practices Buddhist meditation methods. Wilbur has been categorized as a notable New Ager due to his emphasis on transpersonal view. Unlike the biblical Christian worldview, the New Age movement teaches that man is inherently divine, that all things are divine, that all is one, and all is God. One of Wilbur's main interests is neo-perennial philosophy, a combination derived from Indian mystic Sri Aurobindo's cosmic evolution account with Aldous Huxley's mystic views in his book, The Perennial Philosophy.
Brian McLaren devoted an entire chapter to emergent thinking and a generous orthodoxy. In Why Am I Emergent, chapter 19, Brian McLaren says, I am trying, with Ken Wilber's help, to make clear that I believe there is something above and beyond the current alternatives of modern fundamentalism / absolutism and pluralistic relativism. This above and beyond is, I believe, the way of Jesus, which is the way of love and embrace. It integrates what has gone before so that something new can emerge.
One of the things that makes it incredibly clear that Rob Bell is a New Ager. He's into New Age thought, and his view of God is not the biblical view of God, even though he sometimes and often talks, especially from the pulpit, as though he's referencing and speaking of the God of the Bible, is his endorsement of Ken Wilber. On page 192, anyway, of my edition of the Velvet Elvis, his book Velvet Elvis, he encourages for a mind-blowing introduction into emergent thinking, and divine creativity. He advises his audience to spend 3 months at the feet of Ken Wilber. When you realize that Ken Wilber is a full-blown New Ager, he's a Buddhist, he teaches the lie that we recognize our own godhood, that we are God, through contemplative prayer.
So what I'm going to do is basically go into a series of meditative states here, and the first state that I'm going to try to enter is a type of nirvikalpa samadhi. It's not a classic nirvikalpa, but I'm going to try to basically suspend all mental activity with the exception of that witnessing delta state. So what you should see, if this works, is virtually all of those lights should go to zero.
He teaches the lie of cosmic evolution, that what starts at matter eventually progresses to a realization of divinity, that we are God.
You want to try to get a sense of I amness stripped of objects and realize that if all objects are gone, there is still I amness. Now, usually the way this happens is a difficult process of training where you actually, for 2 or 3 years, have to learn to get into meditative states where you suspend all objects, either by concentrative modes or modes of insight awareness that go actually into the unmanifest. So you are in an unmanifest state of vast consciousness with no objects arising, and there's still I amness, radiant, open, empty I amness.
McLaren got the idea of emergent from Ken Wilber, a Buddhist, right? Well, what does emergent actually mean? What are we talking about? What's emerging? Well, in philosophy, there's this concept called panentheism, all right? Panentheism means God is in everything. It's just like a baby step away from pantheism. Pantheism says God is everything. Panentheism says, well, God is a little bit different than everything, but he's in everything. New Age is panentheistic. Well, Wilber is pantheist, and I would say that Moltmann is panentheist. Emergent is really panentheist. They would believe God is in everything. Since God is in everything, now he's trying to emerge from it. So what's emerging is God. Since God is in everything and God is emerging, the future has to be bright. Everything's going to get better.
Ken Wilber writes in A Brief History of Everything, the very book that Rob Bell is encouraging Christians to read, about, quote, a cosmic consciousness that is spirit awakened to its own true nature. And he capitalizes spirit there because he's talking about, we would reference the spirit with a capital S because he's the Holy Spirit, but he's speaking of the Spirit of God as he understands it. But he's saying that as we travel through this cosmic evolution from matter to spirit, we become aware of our own spirit, that we are spirit, and that's our nature, capital S, that we are God. And he made no bones about, that we are becoming gods. And that's what Rob Bell is pushing on his followers in Velvet Elvis.
Your body's an object, your feelings are objects, your thoughts are objects. You can feel the self-contraction, that's an object. What's aware of that? I amness, the pure self. So, what was present 5 years ago? I amness. What was present 50 years ago? Yeah, I amness. What was present 5 centuries ago? Show me your original face, the face you had before your parents were born. I amness. No objects at all. That fundamental, ongoing I amness. What was present 5 millennia ago? Yeah, before Abraham was, I am.
Christians laughed at the New Age, and Shirley MacLaine and her crystals and standing on the beach shouting, "I am God."
I am God.
I am God. I am God.
But right now, you've got Brian McLaren and Rob Bell telling people to read Ken Wilber, who's saying the same thing that Shirley MacLaine said 25 years ago, that I am God.
In his book, Partly Right, Campolo makes another incredible statement. He says this: "We affirm our divinity by doing what is worthy of God's." He says that Robert Schuller affirms our divinity, yet does not deny our humanity. Isn't that what the gospel is? Well, anybody who knows the gospel knows that that's not the gospel. It's a different gospel. And of course, he's quoting Robert Schuller as well. And you're going back even further now, because Robert Schuller had brought a lot of these concepts in as well. In fact, Campolo goes on to say in that same quotation from Partly Right, goes on to say this: "The hymn writer who taught us to sing Amazing Grace was all too ready to call himself a wretch, forgetting our divinity." Then he quotes Erich Fromm, the godless atheist. He says that Fromm recognized the diabolical social consequences that can come about when a person loses sight of his or her own divinity. Now, that was Satan's lie in the garden to Eve. You shall be as God. The King James, ye shall be as God. In fact, I quote the King James there because Erich Fromm, one of the titles of one of his books was just that, ye shall be as gods. He took the serpent's lie and titled his book that way.
And Sweet says humanity needs to learn the truth of Merton's words. We are already one. You have the New Age that say that we are one already.
Episcopalian Bishop Alan Jones has written a book called Reimagining Christianity, in which he has the following scenario. He talks about contemplative prayer in this as having this role. This silence at the heart of mysticism is not only the meeting point of the great traditions, but also where all hearts might meet. In other words, not only all the world's religions are going to be united by the silence, but all humanity will be united by the silence. At the cathedral, we break the bread for those who follow the path of the Buddha and walk the way of the Hindus. So the idea is not to convert Buddhists or Hindus to Christianity, or especially, to be born again and trust Jesus for their salvation, but that all religions are valid at their mystical level. Brian McLaren heartily endorses Alan Jones' views and says, "It used to be that Christian institutions and systems of dogma sustained the spiritual life of Christians." In other words, it used to be doctrine is what Christianity was all about. Increasingly, spirituality itself is what sustains everything else. In other words, it's spirituality, which is, in this case, is produced through contemplative prayer. Alan Jones is a pioneer in reimagining a Christian faith that emerges from authentic spirituality. In other words, this idea that all religions are equally valid and that God is within every person, and that's how you realize your inner divinity is through going into the silence and meeting your